On March 5th, 1933, the day after Roosevelt was inaugurated, the New York Herald Tribune, then fairly much the voice of the Republican Party, had an editorial titled, "For Dictatorship If Necessary." The dictatorship then, this was before Hitler and Mussolini was still not taken too seriously, before dictatorship had acquired some of its sinister connotations that it now has. Walter Lippmann, then the principal columnist in the country, visited Franklin Roosevelt at Warm Springs, Georgia, where he was working on his rehabilitation from polio. And he said the following: "The situation is critical, Franklin. You may have no alternative but to assume dictatorial powers." And in his column, Walter Lippmann said, "A mild species of dictatorship will help us over the roughest spots in the road ahead." In Roosevelt's first radio address, taking advantage of this new technology that he would master so thoroughly, he spoke to the American Legion, an organization that had been founded, by the way, by his fifth cousin, Teddy. In the draft of his speech, this was actually removed from the speech, but in the draft of his speech, he wrote to say to these members of the American Legion, veterans of World War I, "As new Commander-in-Chief under the oath to which you are still bound, I reserve to myself the right to summon you in any phase of the situation which now confronts us." The centralizing impulse of progressivism to find ways around or over or through the separation of powers and the checks and balances that the founders put in place. Because progressivism believed that the American people had now evolved in sophistication and temperateness, that we had nothing to fear from majorities. And the feeling was that we had reached a degree of enlightenment in public science, in political science, and in public administration, a field in some ways founded by Woodrow Wilson as an academic, that we simply had nothing to fear from the concentration of power. Hence it was that Franklin Roosevelt in 1936, in a speech at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, foreshadowed his attempt to pack the Supreme Court, which was an impediment to the consolidation of power in the executive branch. He famously said, did Franklin Roosevelt, "If one horse lies down in the traces or plunges off in another direction, the field will not be plowed. All the branches of government must be brought under the leadership of one driver of the horses." And so it was in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt said that the power to subordinate individuals and private groups in society, the groups of what we now call civil society, is essential to the governance of the United States. Presidents got the power and the pretense and the audacity to suggest these things because they had acquired a kind of role that we now divide between the presidency and Oprah Winfrey. The desire, that is, the pretense that they are unique interpreters of the Americans' feelings. Bill Clinton famously said, "I feel your pain." He wasn't the first president to talk that way. Franklin Roosevelt said in one of his first fireside chats, he said to the country, "Tell me your troubles." Try to imagine George Washington asking the people of Virginia to tell him their troubles. The founders did not think elected officials should be related to the public in this therapeutic way. In the 1992 debate, presidential debate, George Herbert Walker Bush, the incumbent president, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot was on stage, third-party candidate. They had one of those Oprah-type debates where the public got up and asked questions. In the midst of this, someone got up, holding the microphone, and said the following: "How can we," referring to the American people, "as symbolically the children of the future president, expect you to meet our needs? our needs in housing, and you name it. Now, what's happening to the American people when they describe themselves as like children related to a parental government? I don't want to pick on Clinton or anyone else. Richard Nixon himself said the average American is just like the child in the family. You give him some responsibility and he is going to amount to something. Vice President Al Gore said government should act like grandparents in the sense that grandparents perform a nurturing role. This is a new idea of governance, but it's now, I think, is permeated quite into the way we think and talk. Michelle Obama, during the 2008 campaign, said, Barack will never let you, the American people, will never let you go back to your lives as usual, uninvolved and uninformed. Now, never mind the insult in this, the assumption that in our lives we're uninvolved and uninformed, but where did we get the idea that it is the purpose of politics, that it is the function of progressive politics to yank us out of our usual lives and improve us in this way? I refer again to James Q. Wilson. He said there has been a transformation of public expectations about the scope of federal action, one that has put virtually everything on Washington's agenda and left nothing off. If you doubt it, try thinking of a human want or difficulty that is not now defined as a public policy problem. Jim Wilson thought the crucial moment was 1965, the year we passed Medicare, but that wasn't, in his judgment, the crucial development then. Rather, the crucial development was passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, of which No Child Left Behind is, I think, the 7th iteration. No one had hitherto suggested that the federal government had a role in the quintessentially state and local responsibility of education. Once the federal government passed that barrier, what Jim Wilson called the legitimacy barrier, there simply was no further impediment to the expansion of the federal government into all forms of American life. Well, this has been coming a long time. 1962, at this university, Yale conferred an honorary degree on President Jack Kennedy. It was the day when he famously said, "Now I have the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree." He said in the course of his remarks to the Yale graduates that day that we live now at a time, and this is the classic progressive view of the world, where we no longer have clashes of principle. We're all agreed today about what the principles are and the nature of the American regime. We are no clashes of principle, only matters of degree. Questions, said Jack Kennedy to the Yale audience, are questions of management and of administration. Again, we're back with Mr. Drew, the administrator. I think American politics today refutes that at every turn. We are arguing today decidedly about principles, about the nature of the American regime. The liberal and conservative argument today has achieved an uncommon clarity because Barack Obama is an uncommonly serious and consequential president. It is often said that some people want to be president to be something and others want to be president to do something. Bill Clinton is a good example of the former, Barack Obama of the latter. Of all the dumb things said about Barack Obama, it is that in order to understand Barack Obama, you must understand Kenya and anti-colonialism or whatever it is. Perfect nonsense. To understand Barack Obama, you need to understand the Yale Faculty Club. You need to understand the American academic culture. You need to understand the progressive tradition, which has a distinguished and long pedigree now in American history, and a very firm exemplar in Barack Obama. The liberal conservative argument today turns on two crucial values of Western political thought: freedom and equality, always in tension, the tension always being adjusted. Today, liberals tend to stress equality, not just equality of opportunity, but equality of social outcome, equality of condition. Therefore, liberals look upon the multiplication of entitlement programs as serving the public good because it makes more and more Americans equally dependent for material well-being on a common source, the federal government. And they tend to look upon markets in allocating wealth and opportunity as destructive because markets are not egalitarian institutions. Conservatives today stress freedom, stressing that they stress that markets are the proper allocators of wealth and opportunity, and the multiplication of entitlement programs is subversive of the attitudes and aptitudes essential for a free society. Thrift, industriousness, self-reliance, deferral of gratification, long time horizon, and all the rest. This is a kind of clarity has been brought to this by the very ambition of Mr. Obama's agenda. Obama set out to be the fourth transformative liberal president, and I think has succeeded. The first being Woodrow Wilson, the second, Woodrow Wilson's Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Franklin Roosevelt, the third, the Texas congressman who came to Washington as a protege of Roosevelt's in 1938, Lyndon Johnson, and the fourth being Barack Obama. Against this, conservatives today tend to stress American exceptionalism. That, to some people, they think that's a recent vintage, a kind of modern crude patriotism or nationalism. Not true. It's an idea that again traces its pedigree back to de Tocqueville, who said the Americans are different because, unlike Europeans, Americans were born free, by which he meant they were born without a feudal past, hence without an established church, hence without an entrenched aristocracy. The American people had an distinctive and exceptional revolution because it did not purport to deliver happiness, but to clear the ground for the pursuit of happiness. I think the most important word in the very important first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence is the word secure. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and governments are instituted among men to secure those rights. Not to give us rights, but to secure pre-existing natural rights. This is why Woodrow Wilson said quite explicitly Americans should not read the first two paragraphs of the Declaration. They'll only get these terrible ideas about natural rights pre-existing the government. What he called 4th of July sentiments, disparagingly. Americans have an exceptional constitution because it is a constitution that doesn't say what the government must do for us, but what the government may not do to us. Americans remain exceptionally confident, that is, exceptionally immune to the modern pessimism that vast impersonal forces control our destinies, that we indeed can still, as individuals, thrive and shape our destinies, much more so in every conceivable poll than any European population at this point. The argument we're having today, then, is where is the creative energy in society? Is it in government or is it in civil society?